It's dock in space, so they were practicing that on Gemini. I remember when I was in high school listening to all these. They were just fascinating, and we're making progress, and we were going places. This was really something. All right. Here's two Mercury astronauts, or two Gemini astronauts. In the Gemini capsule, it was like you were sitting in the front seat of a Volkswagen, and that was it. You sat there for 2 weeks. You couldn't get up, you couldn't move around, you couldn't do anything.
You floated.
Yeah, but not very far, unless they opened up the hatch, and then you could float out. Ed White was the first one in 1965 to leave the capsule and to float out and do a spacewalk. All right, after Gemini, you had Project Apollo, sent 3 men into space and land on the moon. And very, very ambitious project. Here, the first Apollo 1, Ed White, Virgil Gus Grissom, and Roger Chaffee, and they were killed when the capsule burned up. They had actually rushed the construction of the capsule too quickly. They had a lot of wires all over the place. The design of the capsule escape system was not very good. You couldn't get out very fast. And you're operating in a pure oxygen atmosphere, so it tends to be very dangerous. But they had a fire on the launch pad and they died. So the first mission to go to the moon was Apollo 11. Okay, Neil Armstrong, Michael Collins, and Buzz Aldrin. These were the first guys to go to the moon. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin took the lunar lander down to the lunar surface. Michael Collins circled the Earth and waited for them to come back up again. And they rode up on a Saturn V rocket. Saturn V rocket, which you see here, generated 7.5 million pounds of thrust. It was the largest rocket the United States developed during this period of time. I think it's still one of the largest rockets ever developed. The amazing thing about the Apollo program is that we developed this rocket. I remember I went to the plant where they were built, and we only used it like 5 or 6 times. Then after the Apollo program, we discontinued its production. It's like we threw it away. That's another story. All right, here's a picture of the Earth taken from Apollo 11 crew, and this was a very important picture. This gave people an idea of the beauty of the Earth and the fragility of the Earth hanging out there in the darkness of space. So Apollo 11, we got to the moon in 1969. This is the Earth from high Earth orbit. And here we see the lunar landing module. Lunar landing module was just designed to fly into space. The walls were very thin. You could almost put your finger through the wall of the lunar landing module. This is a very capable aircraft. The first stage would take you down to the moon. The second stage would take you up from the moon. When the Apollo astronauts landed on the moon for the first time, they used up all but about 20 seconds of their fuel. They almost exhausted their fuel when they got down on the moon. But they got down on the moon all right. Apollo 13, if you're ever going to go in the space program or you're going to go on a flight, never take a flight with the number 13 after it. And Apollo 13, the lunar
Houston, we have a problem.
Command module had an explosion that blew up. It was useless. They lost their oxygen, they lost their propulsion. So they all had to go into the descent module. And this is how they got back. They spent 3.5, 4 days in the descent module. They went around the moon and then they came back to Earth, got back into the command module, and then they landed. So it served as a lifeboat. It hadn't been intended to do that, but it served as a lifeboat. Here we see Buzz Aldrin getting off the ladder, getting ready to land on the moon. When Armstrong landed on the moon, he had the words, I forget what the words were. Become
Small step for man,
small step for man, giant step for mankind. First words said from the surface of the moon. They got down there. They were only on the moon about 2 hours, and they went around. They took samples. They left, instruments on the moon. Now, the one thing that I find really amazing is they left some instruments on the moon to measure lunar quakes. And they put them out, and they were powered by, plutonium to generate the electricity. So they left them on the moon. Now, after the end of the Apollo program, I mean, those instruments are still on the moon measuring lunar quakes. Reagan administration comes in, cost cutting. The Reagan administration said, we cannot afford, we have to cut back on NASA. We cannot afford to monitor these instruments for lunar quakes. How much did it cost to monitor them? I don't know, a couple $100,000 a year. Turn them off. So they turned off the two instruments. The problem was, once you turned them off, you couldn't turn them on again. Now, maybe the better idea would have been not to listen to them. Think of that, oh boy, not to listen to them. Well, in any case, we cannot monitor lunar quakes anymore because the instruments have been turned off. Now, this was the manned program. The unmanned program was Pioneer 10 and 11. These were the first space probes that went to Jupiter, Saturn, and the outer solar system. Very successful, took photographs. It was followed up by Voyager, also very successful. The Voyagers are still operating 30, 35 years later, and they've won about $10 or $12 billion. They're actually beyond the influence of the sun. They're in interstellar space now. We can still communicate with them. It takes 13 hours of light speed, but we can still communicate with them. These space probes took pictures of Saturn, they took pictures of the outer planets, and they gave us information on these planets that we never had before because our telescopes weren't good enough. All right, after the end of the Apollo program, they had, they still had the hardware, so we decided to launch Skylab, which was the first space station. Skylab was actually the third stage of the Saturn V rocket, so we put the Skylab up there, and they had 4 astronauts go to it. They stayed there for a while, then they abandoned it and it fell down. Later on, after the end of Apollo, we decided to do the space station, and that was being launched by the Space Shuttle. The Space Shuttle was an interesting vehicle. It was a vehicle designed to take us into space, to build a space station and to go to Mars or go to the moon. Well, they cut out Mars and the moon, so they just had this vehicle to take us into space. So the Space Shuttle was used to build the International Space Station. And we in the Soviet Union launched various parts of the space station. Space Shuttle is no longer functional. The United States no longer has a way to launch astronauts into space. We can't do it. We have to go on Soviet rockets, Soviet Soyuz rockets. But the space station has been a great success. Been orbiting about 20 years. It's given us a lot of experience in working in space. I think the longest stay for any astronaut on the space station has been about a year or a year and a half. Here you see astronauts on the space station holding oranges. Why they're holding oranges, I don't know. Space Shuttle.
Probably for the tank, a salute to tank.
Okay. The Space Shuttle is had liquid fuel and solid fuel rockets. The liquid fuel rockets had 4 engines in the back, each developed 1.5 million pounds of thrust. The liquid fuel was hydrogen and oxygen, and then these are the solid fuel rockets right here. Now, we hadn't used solid fuel rockets to launch people into space before. Why? Because once you touch them off, you can't stop them, they're gone. So they're inherently very dangerous. NASA knew that there was a danger to the space shuttle, but they underestimated it. They thought they could launch this thing into space once every 2 weeks. Well, it turned out that it would take about 4 months to rehab it and to change it and to get it ready to go up again. I remember going to the Alabama Space and Rocket Center Marshall looking at one of the space shuttles that come back, look at the tiles underneath the space shuttle. It was remarkable. You could see the sear flames from, coming back into the atmosphere. But it was a remarkable vehicle. Unfortunately, there were 2 deadly accidents on the space shuttle, the Columbia accident and the Challenger accident. And they went in and they fixed the problem. They launched till 2011, and then they retired the space shuttle. One of those, I think, exciting parts of the space program, though, is the unmanned program. For example, we've launched probes to Mars. We had 2 probes, Spirit and Opportunity, which were supposed to work for 3 months, drive about a mile or a mile and a half all over the surface of Mars. Well, Opportunity is still, for instance, Spirit. One of them is still working after about 10 years, and it's driving over Mars, and, takes pictures, goes to sleep at night, wakes up in the morning, takes more pictures. I have another one up there now called Odyssey, which is taking pictures. When they landed these things on Mars, they did it in an unusual way. What they did is they came down, they had braking rockets, they came down through the atmosphere, they had parachutes, and then when they got about 5 miles up, they encased them in a series of balloons, and the balloons dropped down and bounced all over the surface of Mars. All right, all of these are launched from the Kennedy Space Center, Vandenberg Air Force Base, and various locations. Stardust mission. This was a mission that was supposed to rendezvous with a comet and collect the debris from a comet. It did. The capsule came back and it entered the Earth's atmosphere, but the landing system failed, so it just crashed. Well, nothing works all the time. And then one that I found was very interesting was the New Horizons mission. Here's New Horizons. New Horizons headed for Pluto. When New Horizons left for Pluto in 2006, Pluto was a planet. And after that period of time, Pluto was taken out of its status as a planet. It was deemed not to be a planet anymore. It's simply one of many objects out there at the end of the solar system. But it flew by the planet Pluto, and it gave wonderfully detailed pictures. Pluto, it showed mountains, ridges, valleys, things that look like volcanoes. It was amazing. The past 25 years, 30 years, have been the golden age for space exploration. When I created my webpage, the first studies I put up were my own studies, not with everyone else. All right, so this is the basic study that outlines the historic resources associated with the American space program. And I'm very proud of this. I put this up. I had a lot of criticism from historians and agencies or whatever, but nobody has ever really broken the framework for which I operated. Now, some agencies, such as the Army was very cooperative. It would help me a lot. Others, like the Air Force, were terrible. I went out to Edwards Air Force Base, for example, and to do a study of Edwards Air Force Base. And I met with the base historian by the name of Dick Hallion. Dick Hallion, in my opinion, was a son of a bitch. He got me in there, and I went in to see him, and I got into this room all full of colonels and generals or whatever, and he introduces me and tells them why I'm out there to look at their site to see what can be made National Historic Landmarks. And then he turns to me and says, "Well, Dr. Butowski, tell me, why do you think you have any qualifications to do this study?" And I thought, uh-oh, we're getting off to a bad start here. So I just said, well, I have a PhD, I've done a lot of work in the program, I think I know the rules and regulations, I think I can do the study. All right, so that was it. And then after I gave my talk, I said, you're the historian, why don't you show me what you have on the history of the base? Do you have a history of the base? What are the resources of the base? We don't have a history. Oh. What are what are the resources there? Do you have any list of what the resources are? No, we don't have any of that either. Well, what do you have here? Well, we don't have anything here. And I say, well, you know, this is a site that's important in the history of the space program. He said, no, this doesn't have anything to do with the space program. I said, well, can I see something? No, you don't have clearance. You have to have security clearance. I'm thinking to myself, what do you mean security clearance? If I need photographs of your resources, I'll go to the Soviet embassy in Washington. And they'll give me things. But they wouldn't let me off the flight line. They literally kept me off the flight line. The only thing he told me was, the only thing we have out here is the Rogers Dry Lake. So it was a nice visit to Edwards Air Force Base, but I couldn't get off on the flight line. I came back to Washington, and being a sneaky bastard, I went over to the NASA History Office and I asked them about the county and what they had. And it turned out he had written a book on the history of Edwards Air Force Base, and it was in draft format, and they were reviewing it. And it said Edwards Air Force Base, birthplace of the American space program. I'm thinking, oh, you son of a bitch. Okay, so I couldn't see any of their launch facilities. I couldn't see any of their test facilities. They wouldn't show me anything. So I'm thinking, what could I do? This is a site important in not only aeronautics but astronautics. It's a site of the Bell X-1 flight. It's a site of the X-15 flight. And I'm looking around. I'm thinking, what is the facility? It's the Rogers Dry Lake. That's why they come out here for. Because they have this big, expansive, flat lake bed that floods every year and it evens it out. So I did a National Historic Landmark nomination for the Rogers Dry Lake. And I sent it in, and the Air Force went ballistic. Ballistic. And they said, you can't do that, it has no integrity. What do you mean it has no integrity? Because it floods every year. So, that's why you use it. So that was a big fight. The Air Force did not want me to designate the Rogers Dry Lake as a National Historic Landmark. And, we had several meetings and back and forth and back and forth. Eventually what happened was that the Air Force agreed to meet with a representative from the Park Service to iron it out at Edwards Air Force Base. So my boss had to go out there and see Bars. So Bars, has this very interesting sense of humor. He said he would go out, but he would only meet them on a Sunday. So he made them all come into work on Sunday. So we went out, and the Air Force eventually agreed that we could do the Rogers Dry Lake, but only part of the Rogers Dry Lake. So Edwards Air Force Base is now an NHL, but it's only part of Edwards Air Force Base. But that was an example of some of the problems I had. The Air Force was terrible. All right, in my study, I did an introductory essay, talked about the history of the space program, and I broke it down into certain categories where I would look for facilities, such as technical foundations of the program, 458, facilities associated with the effort to land a man on the moon, facilities associated with the exploration of the planets in the solar system, and finally the role of scientific and communications satellites. I thought I did a good job on that. So, technical foundations in 458, that meant I had to go to NASA Langley. NASA Langley, NACA, was the first NASA site. It was founded in 1916. And it was mainly devoted to aeronautics. So I go to NASA Langley, and I came across the variable density wind tunnel, constructed by Max Monk, a German engineer in 1920. Now, if you know anything about aeronautics, when you use wind tunnel testing to determine the shape of the airfoil, well, in order to get a good result, you really need a full-size airfoil. But imagine putting a 747 in a wind tunnel. They don't have wind tunnels that big. So they have small wind tunnels. So in order to get good results from small wind tunnels, they had to come up with various mathematical formula. So Max Monk was a German engineer, and the Germans were the best aeronautical engineers, and he said that you can get the best Reynolds numbers with small wind tunnels if you pressurize them. So he pressurized this wind tunnel to 20 atmospheres. So you could put a small scale model of whatever you were going to build in there at 20 atmospheres, and you could get good results. And this was the first pressure tunnel. And I wanted to designate this because even though it had nothing to do with the space program, because it showed the technological, here's the inside of the tunnel. That's what the inside of the wind tunnel looks like. It showed the fact that NACA was going to be a technological organization, and they were going to accomplish very difficult feats of engineering through the use of science and technology. And this pressure tunnel was the father of all wind tunnels after this period of time. So I went over to NASA Langley and I found it. And the wind tunnel was no longer in operation. This is a wind tunnel in 1929. At the time, it was the most advanced wind tunnel in the United States. So we did the full-scale wind tunnel. That was good. And then I started looking around and see what else they had. And then they had another wind tunnel called the full-scale tunnel, built in 1929. This was the largest wind tunnel of its type in the country up through the Second World War. They would literally take planes, full-size planes, American fighter planes, Japanese planes, and put them in this wind tunnel and test them. In 1942, the United States Army captured a Japanese Zero in Alaska, and the Japanese Zero was very maneuverable, and they wanted to find out why. So they brought it back to NASA Langley, and they put it in here, and they delved into all its secrets. They found out why it was maneuverable, and they found out how you shoot it down. So this was another one of the wind tunnels, and they tested actually Apollo, Mercury, and Gemini capsules in here to determine their flight characteristics. The throat of this wind tunnel was 30 by 60. Here's the throat. Now I must say this was built for $1 million. 1929 it was in operation through the 1990s, and eventually they decommissioned it. And I went back in 1995 and they gave a speech at the decommissioning of the full-scale tunnel, and I was very sorry to see it be decommissioned. So even though it became a landmark, that doesn't mean it was going to be preserved. All right.
Was that Langley Air Force Base here?
It's next to Langley Air Force Base. Okay. Then two other wind tunnels. The 8-foot high-speed tunnel. This was a wind tunnel that was constructed after the Second World War when the Air Force was working on flying faster than the speed of sound. So they had actually one wind tunnel with 3 test sections. One test section it would be below the speed of sound. One test section would be at the speed of sound. The other test section would be above the speed of sound. So it was a very cost-effective engineering solution to a difficult problem. Here's the wind tunnel. By the time I got down there, it was no longer in operation. This is what the outside looked like. Now the thing I loved about this wind tunnel was they said, no, you don't want to designate this, we're going to tear it down. All right, I don't care. Designate it anyway. Then they let out a contract to tear it down. So the contractor comes out and starts to tear it down. The goddamn thing was too solid. It was too massive. He couldn't tear it down. So it's still there. Or it was still there last time I knew. I don't know. But, okay. Then the Unitary Plan Wind Tunnel. This was out in California at the Ames Research Center. What NASA did was it very rapidly expanded Langley into a facility in California, into a facility in Cleveland, Ohio, and this was the basis of the NASA sites around the country. Like the other wind tunnel, this was a wind tunnel designed to test airplanes below and above the speed of sound. All right, so I started off with precursor NASA facilities. These were NACA facilities. But I wanted to show that there was a tradition of engineering excellence that they're building the NACA that's going to transfer over to NASA. So I got the wind tunnels done. Took a lot of criticism from people saying, what do wind tunnels have to do with Project Apollo? Well, you have to look at it in its context. The engineering excellence of Apollo, where did it come from? Came from people who have been working on wind tunnels. All right, the next branch of sites that I was looking at were rocket engine development facilities. How did they develop the rocket engines that went into space? How did they work out the problems? For example, the Centaur rocket was a liquid fuel rocket, and they would, send it up, and it would stop.